Welcome to the White Sox Recap Podcast. I am Ryan McGuffey. We got the news late Tuesday night and into Wednesday morning. I got it Wednesday morning. I hit the sack early and wake up to huge news that the White Sox have traded Luis Robert Jr. to the New York Mets. You know where I've stood if you've listened to this podcast. I've been saying for weeks that I expected Chris Getz to move on from Luis Robert prior to spring training. And in this case, it happened prior to Sox Fest. So what does it mean? What's the return? How much money are the White Sox paying, or are they not paying? Is it going to be reinvested? All of that. I'll get into some of my thoughts on this edition of the podcast. Kind of a breaking news podcast, and it's all brought to you by sinusandSnoringMD.com. The cold is here. It's really cold, folks. Sinuses can be an absolute mess and all out of whack this time of year. Not if you call sinusandSnoringMD.com. I was snoring last night, and I was like, oh, boy, this is a mess. I better look out at my friend, sinusandSnoringMD.com. They have locations all over the place, including Kenosha. They have pop-ups in Elgin. Cap went to sinusandSnoringMD.com, and he's been resolved of his issues. So the White Sox move on from Luis Robert, thus signaling the end of the first rebuild. Folks, this is a really good day. It's a really good day, and I'm going to tell you why on this edition of the White Sox Recap Podcast, and it starts right now. All right, so the White Sox have traded Luis Robert Jr. to the New York Mets in exchange for two young players. Luisangel Acuña, yes, Acuña, that does ring a bell. It's because he's the younger brother of MVP Ronald Acuña with the Braves. Now, is he the same type of player? He's got the same DNA. He's shown signs in the Winter League in Venezuela. He's been absolutely ripping the cover off the ball. He has had a 4-homer game. He did have, as I'm looking at this, made his major league debut in 2024, 39 at-bats. He had 214 at-bats in his career with the New York Mets, 248, 299, 341, 9 doubles, a triple, 3 homers, 14 RBI, 16 stolen bases in 109 games. And then they also traded for a pitcher. They received Truman Pauley. Pauley is 22 years old. He only made 3 starts last year. He was selected in the 12th round of last year's draft from Harvard. Really bright guy, studied mechanical engineering. I'm trying to tell you guys, this isn't about the return. This is not about the return. Not for me. Not about the return at all, because the Chicago White Sox needed to move on from Luis Robert. And a lot of you are probably like, no, they didn't. They didn't get what they were supposed to get. They didn't get the return they were supposed to get. And I understand that. I do. But they should have traded him a couple of years ago. If you ever wanted Luis Robert to get any kind of return worth a damn, you had to make this move a few years ago. The best part of the move is that we had heard that the White Sox were flirting with other teams, that they were willing to pay as much as half of the salary down. That's $10 million. In this case, folks, no money. The White Sox are really transparent about when they sign contracts and what they're paying, and when they make trades, they're just as transparent about cash considerations. In this case, there are no cash considerations. So when you're having a team pick up the entire $20 million contract with the $2 million buyout and the option to pick up a $20 million contract next year, you're going to get a lesser package. And you've seen what the Mets have done. They've revamped their entire lineup because last year was unacceptable to them. They didn't make the playoffs. Stephen Cohen doesn't mess around. This thrusts them way over the luxury tax. They just signed Bo Bichette yesterday. They officially announced that while making the move to acquire Luis Robert Jr. So what does it mean for the Chicago White Sox? Who's playing center field? You got the kid from Tampa Bay that they acquired earlier this offseason. I do think now it's what do the White Sox do with the $20 million? I've been saying this all along. I said it last week with Hoodie, that this White Sox roster is not yet done. I just truly believe that. And I'll be right in front of you here to tell you otherwise if I think that if the White Sox do not make moves. As a matter of fact, Chris Getz will be with me in studio for a new edition of the White Sox Recap Podcast next week. I have plenty to ask him. He's meeting the media in regards to the Robert trade, but there's a lot to ask Chris Getz in regard to the Luis Robert trade and where we go from here. And I expect him to answer those questions as well. I think this gives the White Sox a lot more financial flexibility. I've seen a lot of people on my timeline say this was just a way to get out and have the cheapest payroll in baseball and lose 100 games before a potential lockout. I don't see it that way in this case. A lot of times I line up with you guys. Not in this case. This is a sign of turning the page completely from what was done before. They gave the keys to Luis Robert and Eloy Jimenez and Yoan Moncada, and it didn't work. We saw the most profitable, I guess, return from Luis Robert Jr. from 2020 to 25 / 259, 313, 455. Not great. 115 doubles, 2 triples, 102 homers, 298 RBIs. He stole 102 bases. Gold Glove in 2020. American League All-Star and a Silver Slugger in 2023. We knew about the 30-30 year. But look, when you look at the back of the baseball card for Luis Robert, and I've said this ad nauseum, and it drives me nuts. Luis Robert was not dependent. You could not depend on Luis Robert. He played 100 games, 3 years for the Chicago White Sox, 3 straight years. 2023 had 145. He played 145 games, was a 5.3 WAR player, finished 12th in the MVP. That's the guy we all thought we were going to see year in and year out. 100 games in 2024, 110 games in 2025. Okay, that's 114 missed games the last 2 seasons. He's not a dependable player. I'm not mad about this. As a matter of fact, I am popping champagne about this trade. Chris Getz gets out from underneath of what was handed to him, a shit sandwich. That's what this was. And Luis Robert was a big part of that. And he may go. I saw some people say, what if he goes and becomes an NL All-Star, wins the MVP? Good for him. It was never going to happen with the Chicago White Sox. So you're holding on to that thing in the fridge that you're afraid to throw away because the leftovers were really good, but it's been 5 days now, and you're like, do we throw it away? Do we try to No. You throw it away and you move on, and that's what the Chicago White Sox are doing here with Luis Robert Jr. Now, you get a high-end promise with Acuña because you know the DNA is there. I like the fact that we're going to be able to see the return of this package probably this year. Acuña is a small guy, 5'8", 180 pounds. But you'd expect him to be part of the Chicago White Sox in some way, shape, or form this year. Maybe he starts in AAA. Pauley, who only made 3 starts last year, and that's 4 1/3 innings, by the way, in Class A. He will definitely be coming up through the system. But he's an older player because he was a college pitcher. And so usually college pitchers make their way to the big leagues faster. It's a more depth. Look, this was a spare parts trade. The White Sox do get defensively worse in center field without Luis Robert. That's a fact. I will give you that. When we were doing our lineups the other day, me and Hoodie, I didn't even consider putting Luis Robert in mine. That's how confident I was that the Chicago White Sox were going to move on from Luis Robert. And this is not a personal attack from Luis Robert to me. It's not a personal attack. Matter of fact, I think, and I've been saying this for years, going back to my days with Chuck Garfien at NBC, he is a guy that would fit best in a non-pressure situation. He's going to a pressure situation with the Mets, but he's going to, I saw the Mets fandom and SNY, they're all tweeting. I mean, they should be ecstatic about this trade. They really should. They gave up nothing in essence to get a potential huge return. And I saw projected lineups and he was hitting 7th. And that's what I'm talking about. They're not bringing him in to New York to hit 3, 4, or 5, which is where he was being put every single day as a Chicago White Sox. Because the expectation was, well, was a top 5 prospect at one point, and he's a silver slugger, and he's an all-star, and he's an MVP type candidate. Not here. Not here. So this is what I want the White Sox to do. At least spend $10 million of the 20. At least. I'm not expecting them. I'll go on record. I do not expect the White Sox to reinvest all $20 million. Now, I would love Chris Getz to tell me differently. So maybe that'll happen. But if now let's say you do reinvest the $20 million. That's like 3 players. It's a veteran pitcher. It's a back-end reliever, risk-reward type. I wanted to sign Kirby Yates, but the Angels did for $5 million. Like, that would have been a perfect addition. And an outfielder, a Cedric Mullins type. Is there an outfielder out there? I wonder if like a Michael Talkman will come back. There needs to be a bridge to Braden Montgomery. The bridge to Braden. Braden Montgomery's not starting. I would be stunned if Braden Montgomery started with the Chicago White Sox in 2026. He should not. And if the White Sox use the same model that they did a year ago, which was when you're ready, you'll be called up. If it's 2 weeks into April, 3 months into the season, we got to send you to Arizona and back like Colson Montgomery, whatever it might be. I expect Braden Montgomery to be here sooner than later, but I just don't expect him to be here on opening day. And now you look at the White Sox and you say, this is an interesting team. Because and Andrew Benintendi's now the official misfit. And when you look at the White Sox outfield candidates right now, Brooks Baldwin, Andrew Benintendi, Derek Hill, Everson Perea, which, by the way, he'll probably be the first crack, and Tristan Peters. Those are your 40. That's your outfield. Perea, he's the one that has the big pop, most promise, switch hitter. Or he's a right-handed hitter. He's got some promise. So maybe you give him the keys to start. But I look at Baldwin, Benintendi, Derek Hill, Tristan Peters, Everson. Right now, that can't cut it. You need another outfielder. Just a veteran-type outfielder. And I'm going to give you a couple names. And they're not sexy, folks. They're not going to be sexy. Let's look here. These are all players. Okay. So we're going to get rid of, we're going to look at available, and we're going to look at outfielders only, because there's not a lot. I mean, Cody Bellinger's not coming here. I've seen some people, the Michael Confortos. I would like Harrison Bader. To me, is a guy I've said, like, I'd be really intrigued by Harrison Bader for the Chicago White Sox. Really intrigued by a player like that. But then you look down the list here, like Austin Slater, like he's more of a platoon player. We saw the White Sox bring him in last year. I mentioned Talkman. It's not a sexy list. Bader's probably one of the sexier. And everybody's in their Max Kepler. Is Max Kepler a guy? I just think you got to bring in something. And maybe they'll give these guys who are trying to hang around something. But this is about Luis Robert, folks. We'll get into like what they should do with the money and stuff next week when I have Chris Getz on the podcast. But this is a big day. And in a lot of ways, and I don't want to discredit the fans who are sad about this, because it's another reminder of what might have been. That's what this is. It's another reminder that it just went to complete shit in the first rebuild. And now nobody officially from the 2021 White Sox, the team that won the division just 5 years ago, gone. Everyone gone. How the mighty have fallen. What we thought was going to be a World Series appearance. We at one point were told parades, plural. So now it's officially the Chris Getz show. It has been for a while, but there's no tie to the past here. White Sox trade Luis Robert Jr. for Luisangel Acuña and right-handed pitcher Truman Pauley. Not the exact definition of a blockbuster trade that you once thought maybe for Luis Robert. Not happening. Putting a bow on this edition of the podcast is we had to get something out in regards to the trade and my reaction. And like I said, we'll have Chris Getz in studio next week to talk about this and a lot more about the future of the Chicago White Sox heading into spring training here in the next few weeks and what it's going to look like at Sox Fest next week. Thanks for watching this edition of the White Sox Recap Podcast. And wherever you get your White Sox Recap Podcast, audio form, Spotify, Apple, or everywhere you need to be. Make sure if you're not subscribing, you should already be doing that, and click that notification bell every time we drop a new White Sox Recap Podcast. You will be the first to know. White Sox officially move on from Luis Robert Jr., shipped out to the New York Mets. I'm Ryan McGuffey. We'll see you next time on the White Sox Recap Podcast.